Now, let me mention some TV shows. They are Star Trek, Murder, She Wrote, Remington Steel, Dallas, and T.J. Hooker. What do they have in common? No, they don't have the same directors. They don't even have the same stars. But they do have a guest star in common, and that is Derek Partridge. Now, who is Derek Partridge? Derek Partridge is from the United Kingdom. He was a TV presenter, actor, and news anchor. But what makes Derek very special is he's one of the few people that actually worked for the Rhodesian Broadcasting Corporation and Rhodesian Television. Recently, I contacted him to talk about what it was like working in Rhodesian broadcasting during a time of economic sanctions towards Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe. So sit back and enjoy. If you'd been in Rhodesia in the late 1970s, turned on your radio and television, this is what you would have heard.
We're starting off tonight on the martial arts. And with me in the studio to tell us something about one specific aspect of them are Patricia Backer and Eric Morris. Good evening and welcome to you both.
Good evening.
Well, although it perhaps wasn't said, I, in essence, became a non-person because we in Rhodesia were subject to United Nations sanctions, and I, in effect, had broken that by going out there to work. No, it never in any way affected me by people saying that, but I know exactly what you're talking about from what happened to you, and that would have been the attitude from Prime Minister Harold Wilson, but it didn't seem to permeate down to many other people. In fact, I would say the majority of the people in England were very pro-Rhodesia. They were not on the side of Harold Wilson. Probably the majority of Rhodesians were of British origin. Rhodesians came from, many countries around the world, but the majority certainly would have been of British origin.
When you ended up at the Rhodesian Broadcasting Corporation, you said the decision took 10 seconds to go down there. And, they're saying, okay, come down here as a TV presenter. This was your something that you've been dreaming about for all this time. What was it like the first day that you showed up for work and said, okay, we have a TV show to do?
Well, first of all, it wasn't the Rhodesian Broadcasting Corporation. It was Rhodesian Television. At the time, Rhodesian Broadcasting Corporation was the radio station, and it was state-controlled. RTV, Rhodesian Television, was a private company, very successful, and a completely independent entity from it. Later on, I'll tell you what happened with that. But at the time, no, it was an independent entity. Mike Hart Jones, for my first talk show, gave me two priests who were both very talkative and very controversial because they came from opposite sides of certain religious beliefs. So I didn't have to do one heck of a lot. I suppose it was, but it seemed to come very naturally to me. I really didn't have any problems with it. I just got on with the job and did it. Because of the war, we did have a teleprompter, but we didn't have enough personnel to operate it. So for the news, you read scripts which you had previously typed or the news department had typed. And it was rather funny. We were rather formal there, sort of, suit and tie, but because of the heat, we usually had sort of bathing trunks underneath where you couldn't see them. It actually reminds me of the early days of British radio broadcasting when Lord Reith was in charge. And this is for radio, I stress. He insisted that his radio newscasters were tuxedos, dinner jackets with high pointed wing collars digging into their throats. It's hard to imagine anything more stupid. But no, not really much of a problem. But frankly, Partridge was a live show, so things can go wrong, and you often find yourself sitting in your seat, and you can see the control room, and you can see people panicking madly, and you have to sort of sit there very calmly and try and get through it. And I remember once I was set to interview one of the Rhodesian Air Force squadron leaders, and he was late. well, it's a live show, you have to go on. So I sat in my chair and I swiveled around interviewing myself until he rushed into the studio and saved the situation.
Well, when you were working for Rhodesian Television, you said it was a private company, and there were UN sanctions against Rhodesia. The equipment that they were using at Rhodesian Television was black and white. They didn't get color until I believe the early 1980s. Where did the equipment come from? Was it surplus equipment from the UK?
The equipment, I'm sure, came from South Africa. I mean, most stuff came from South Africa. Mm-hmm. During sanctions, South Africa very kindly supplied us with many, many things, and of course benefited financially very strongly from it. We had sanction busters all over the world, clandestinely acquiring equipment that we needed for every aspect of life and living. But and there was a certain amount of rationing, there were certain shortages, but nothing that was really serious that didn't impinge on one's daily life. One thing about the news, though, you would read your newscasts, and then you would go and listen to the BBC to see what the news really was. There was a certain amount of censorship, I suppose you can call it that, but when you're at war with a terror organization, it's not unreasonable that you have to have some control over what you broadcast to people. It's a very small country, very close-knit, and one of the worst jobs that we had to do every night when we started off the newscast, the first item was, Combined Operations Headquarters regrets to announce the death in action of, and then you would sometimes read your own friends' names. That was tough.
During the time when you were presenting Frankly Partridge and also the newscast, you said that RTV was a private organization, unlike the Rhodesian Broadcasting Corporation, but would, for example, the newsroom or yourself or the producers, say, get phone calls from the government saying, look, we heard that you have this story, we wish that you wouldn't go ahead with it?
No, I simply don't know the answer to that. I imagine that in the newsroom where most of the stories were written, there was some form of control, some form of checking to ensure that what went out was not something they didn't want to go out. But I was not personally aware of any direct censorship.
Good morning. This is the General Service of the Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation, calling from Salisbury on medium wave and on shortwave.
You're tuned to the RBC. The time is 6:10. And as usual, at this time on a Saturday night, it's music to help your sundowners go down. So, cheers, mud in your eye, and as they say where I come from, bottoms up, mate.
This is the Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation Radio Jacaranda, broadcasting in the medium wave band and from 6 p.m. to close down, also on shortwave in the 120-meter band. The time is 2 o'clock.
Here's the Saturday sound. It's Tony's Saturday Scene.
Here's Tony. Well, hi there. Glad you could join me on this very hot and sunny afternoon for the next 2 hours of the new, the not so new, and those great golden oldies. And one of those coming up right now.
I was listening to some air checks of the Rhodesian Broadcasting Corporation, and I think something that would surprise many people, because when I mentioned that I was doing this interview with you, people that say didn't know that Zimbabwe was once Rhodesia, and there are some people out there who didn't know that, they were thinking, oh, African broadcaster, it probably sounds like everything else out there today, and it didn't. I mean, RBC sounded very, very professional.
Oh, it was indeed. The people there tried their very best to emulate the BBC, even though they were the RBC. Mm-hmm. And there was the ambition of a number of them to someday get to Britain and work for the BBC.
You know, there were some people also, very well-known people that worked for the RBC. One of them is who was also a comedian by the name of Warwick Starr.
I knew both Rex Starr and Clem Soleil more by name. For whatever reason, I think that by the time I got there, they were either not working there anymore or working less. And I think I may have met them, but I don't have any particular memories of either of them. But they're both sort of legends for Rhodesians.
Now, you're from the UK, and you were working in Rhodesia, and the British government was very forceful in pushing sanctions toward Rhodesia. How did the local population see you? Did they see you as somebody, oh, you see, look, people do support us. People, he's from the UK. Did they welcome you with open arms?
Very much so. I remember when I started off doing the weather forecast one night, I said something about your weather will be so-and-so. And Mike Hart-Jones, after the broadcast, said, it's not your weather, it's our weather. I felt that they adopted me as a Rhodesian, which is exactly what I felt like, and I adopted Rhodesia as my adopted country. It's still one of the most wonderful memories to me. I still even carry in my wallet my Rhodesian identity card. It was made of metal because this is for the elections, and if the ID cards had been made of plastic, they could have been easily forged, but the metal process was too expensive and too difficult. So yeah, that's still in my wallet, and I remember you used to go through the scans at the airports and something would go off and I'd go, oh damn, it's my metal identity card.
When you were in Rhodesia and doing the TV series, how long did that run for, and what was your deciding factor on leaving?
Everything I did there, the news, the Frankly Partridge, the Quiz Kids, and I did many Message to the Nation specials. I was there for 2 years. Then what happened is that the Minister of Information, who was a great supporter of me, died, and at the same time, somebody in government decided that RBC, the radio, should take over RTV, so that it became, again, a totally government-controlled entity. As a result of that decision, virtually the entire staff of RTV resigned in protest. Some 25 people, all the top producers, directors, technicians, engineers, everybody resigned. They just weren't prepared to work for what we considered to be the idiots at RBC. Mm-hmm. This was an incredibly brave decision because it wasn't like in any other country where you've got 10, 20, 30, 50 other TV stations you can go to. We had one television station in Rhodesia. So they were, in fact, cutting off their jobs and their professions, and they had nowhere else to go. I stayed on for a while because, unknown to the people at RBC, who had always been very jealous of it at RTV, I had a contract, so they couldn't get rid of me initially. When the contract came to an end, they were only too happy to get rid of me. At that point, some people decided to get up a petition to keep me in RTV and in Rhodesia. And there were sort of booths set up all around the major cities with people collecting signatures to keep Partridge in Rhodesia. And ultimately, it was as if you compare populations, it was as if about 10 million Americans signed a petition saying, we want to keep this guy. And this petition was presented to the head of RBC, a very unpleasant Irishman called Jimmy Neal. It didn't achieve anything, and so eventually I left. I did return to the country after that because this Rhodesia as it really is leaflet I revised it and did a new version. So I came back to the country to do that.